The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the silence of the bedroom at 5:30 in the morning. Robert Miller opened his eyes and for a brief instant forgot where he was. The king-size bed, the Egyptian linen sheets, the blackout curtains that blocked any trace of light. Everything felt strange, as if he were a visitor in his own home. He got up mechanically, as he had every day for the past 2 years, and headed for the Carrara marble bathroom that looked more like a 5-star hotel spa. In the mirror, a 42-year-old man stared back at him. Deep-set dark circles, black hair beginning to grey at the temples, a permanently tired expression. Robert Miller, CEO of TechVision America, a technology company valued at $3 billion, one of the most successful businessmen in New York. On Forbes, on Fortune, in every ranking of wealth and power. But when he looked in the mirror, all he saw was an empty man. He dressed on autopilot, a charcoal grey Hugo Boss suit, a white Italian shirt, custom-made English shoes. The navy blue tie was chosen without a thought. He walked down the stairs of the mansion on the Upper East Side, one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods, where each townhouse was worth over $10 million. His daughters were still asleep. They were always asleep when he left, and already asleep when he returned. This had been the routine for months. In the gourmet kitchen, equipped with imported appliances that cost the price of a mid-sized sedan, he found the coffee already prepared by the housekeeper who arrived at 5 in the morning. He drank it quickly, without savoring it, checking his emails on his phone. 63 new messages since the previous night. A meeting in half, an hour with Japanese investors, a video conference with the Miami branch at 10, lunch with the venture capital guys at 1, more meetings until 9 at night. He didn't go up to see the girls. He never did. It was better this way, he told himself. They were better off without him around, without having to deal with the constant reminder his very existence brought. The driver was already waiting in the garage with the black Mercedes. Robert got into the car and immersed himself in financial reports, blocking out any thought that wasn't work. New York traffic swallowed 3 hours of his day. He used every minute to work, make calls, negotiate. The company had become more than a business. It was his refuge, his anesthetic, the only thing that still made sense in a world that had crumbled 2 years ago. Ever since Marianne had been taken in that terrible accident on the FDR Drive on a rainy Tuesday night, when she was coming back from picking up the twins from school, the girls survived without a scratch. Marianne hadn't been so lucky. Robert pushed the thought away with the same violence he did every day. Work. Focus on work. On the spreadsheets, the numbers, the growth projections. There he still had control. There things still made sense. At the office, a 20-story glass tower in the financial district, he completed his daily marathon. Meetings, decisions, more meetings. He approved a $50 million investment in expansion, closed a partnership with an artificial intelligence startup, negotiated fiercely with suppliers. At 4 in the afternoon, his assistant, Patricia, entered his office with a worried expression. "Mr. Miller, you have that meeting in Stamford, Connecticut at 6 o'clock. The helicopter is confirmed." Robert looked at his computer screen, then at the pile of contracts on his desk. Another night away. Another day without seeing his daughters awake. He was about to confirm when something strange happened. A feeling in his chest, like a tightening, a voice whispering that he shouldn't go. He never listened to intuitions. He was a man of data, of logic, of reason. But that voice insisted. "Cancel the meeting, Patricia. Reschedule for tomorrow. I'm going to work from home today." The assistant's eyes widened, clearly surprised. In 2 years, Robert had never cancelled an important meeting, but she just nodded and left to make the necessary calls. Robert grabbed his laptop and a few documents, informed his driver, and by 5 in the afternoon he was on his way home. An hour earlier than usual. In traffic, he felt a growing anxiety, as if he were about to discover something important. He arrived at the mansion at 6:15. The winter sun over Manhattan was already beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. He entered through the front door, silently, as he always did. The house was too big, too modern, designed by a famous architect with lots of glass and exposed concrete. Marianne had chosen every detail, every piece of furniture. Sometimes Robert wanted to sell everything and move, but he knew that would be erasing the last traces of her. That's when he heard it. A soft female voice, singing quietly. It wasn't a familiar song. It was a simple lullaby, the kind you sing to children. Robert stopped in the entrance hall, his heart accelerating for no apparent reason. The voice was coming from the large living room. He walked slowly, silently, drawing closer. What he saw through the half-open door made him freeze in place. In the center of the spacious room, on the Persian rug that had cost a fortune, the new nanny was kneeling on the floor. She wore a simple light blue cotton dress and was still wearing the yellow rubber gloves she used for cleaning. Her brown hair was tied in a loose bun, a few stray strands framing a simple makeup-free face, weathered by sun and work. She had her hands clasped in prayer, and her eyes were closed, but she wasn't alone. In front of her, also kneeling, with their little hands clasped in the same way, were Laura and Lucy, his 3-year-old twin daughters. Robert's heart stopped, not because of the prayer scene itself, but because of the expression on the girls' faces. Peace. An absolute, serene peace that he hadn't seen in 2 years. Since before the accident, since when Marianne was still with them. Robert hid behind the door, his body trembling. His legs felt weak and he had to lean against the doorframe. He didn't want to interrupt that moment. He didn't dare, as if any movement of his could break a precious and fragile spell. "Amen," said the nanny with her thick accent from rural Mississippi, where every vowel had a different cadence. The girls repeated, their tiny voices echoing in the hall. "There now, my little angels," the nanny said, opening her eyes. "Now we've talked to God in heaven and to your mommy." Laura, the shyer of the two, the one who hadn't spoken in months, who only pointed when she wanted something, opened her lips. Robert held his breath. Is Mommy in heaven?" The voice was hoarse, unused. "She is, my love. She's up there, looking down at you all the time, proud of the beautiful girls you are." "Can she hear us?" Laura insisted, and tears were forming in her little brown eyes. The nanny pulled the girl into a tight hug. "Yes, she can. She hears every word, every laugh, every time you're good girls. And you know what else? She smiles when she sees you happy." It was then that Lucy, the more outgoing of the two but who had become apathetic and distant, threw herself into the nanny's arms, and she began to cry. Not a tantrum cry or a whimper. A deep cry, the kind that came from a very deep place in the soul. A cry of longing, of pain, of everything. A 3-year-old child didn't know how to express. "I want my mommy," Lucy sobbed, clinging to the nanny's dress. "I miss her. I miss her every day." Robert felt his own tears begin to roll down his face. How long had it been since he'd heard his daughters express this? All the child psychologists he had hired, all the therapists specializing in trauma, no one had managed to make the girls talk about Marianne. They had closed themselves in a cocoon of silence and apathy. And there was this simple woman, a nanny with no university degrees, no pedagogy courses, from renowned institutions, achieving what no one else had. "I know, my love, I know," the nanny murmured, rocking Lucy in her arms. "Missing someone hurts. It hurts a lot. But you know what your mommy left for you?" She left her smile. "That beautiful smile you had when you were just a little baby. Can you give me that smile?" Lucy pulled back a little, wiping her tears with her small hands, and then, slowly, the corners of her mouth curved upwards. It was a small, hesitant, trembling smile, but it was a smile, real, genuine, the first in 2 years. Robert couldn't hold it in. A sob escaped his throat, too loud. The 3 females in the room immediately turned towards him. The nanny instantly paled upon seeing him standing there, tears streaming openly down his face. She jumped to her feet, pulling off the cleaning gloves with nervous gestures. "Mr. Miller, I didn't know you were home. I'm so sorry, Her voice was trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "I shouldn't have done that without asking permission. I know it's not my place to teach the girls about religion, I just thought. But I had. No, right? You're going to fire me and I need this job so much. Please forgive me. Stop!" Robert's voice came out hoarse, choked with emotion. He entered the living room, wiping his face with the back of his hand. The twins looked at him with that expression he knew so well, distant, as if he were a stranger who lived in the same house. That hurt more than anything. He approached the nanny, who looked like she was about to faint from nervousness. "What's your name again? I'm sorry, I hired you 3 weeks ago and I hired you 3. Even really know your name." "Grace, sir. Everyone calls me Grace." Her voice was low, submissive. She looked at the floor, at her hands, anywhere but at him. "Grace." Robert took a deep breath. "Look at me, please." She slowly raised her eyes. They were brown, simple, honest. The eyes of someone who knew pain. The eyes of someone who knew loss. Robert recognized it because he saw the same thing in his own eyes every morning. "Never," he said, and his voice trembled. "Never apologize for what I just saw. You did something that 7 nannies before you all, with impeccable resumes and degrees from expensive universities, couldn't do. You made my daughters smile again, talk again, feel again." Grace blinked, confused, tears beginning to well up. "But sir, I didn't do anything special. I just talked to them. I just prayed." "You did everything special." Robert looked at the twins who were watching the conversation with curiosity. "We need to talk. Tonight, after the girls are asleep. Is that okay?" "Of course, Mr. Miller. Whatever you need." He nodded and turned to leave, but stopped. "And Grace, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you." That night, after Laura and Lucy were put to bed, after he read them a story for the first time in months, feeling their small hearts beating against his as they snuggled beside him, Robert went down to the kitchen. Grace was there, sitting at the wooden table where the staff ate their meals, her hands clasped, nervous. "Sit here with me," Robert said, pulling out a chair. "And tell me everything. Who are you, Grace? Where did you come from? How did you manage to reach my daughters when no one else could?" And so in that kitchen, illuminated by the soft light of the lamps, as New York slept outside, Grace began to tell her story, and Robert understood that he had just met someone who would change his life forever. Grace looked at her own hands on the table, hands calloused from work, nails short and clean, without polish. She began to speak in a low voice, heavy with the southern accent that made each word more musical. "I was born in a small town in Mississippi, Mr. Miller, on a little farm, even further out in the country. My daddy grew corn and cotton. My mama sewed for other folks. We didn't have much, but we had plenty of love. There were 7 of us kids. I was the 4th. She smiled at the memory. The house was made of clapboard. The roof was tin. It rained inside in the winter, but it was ours, you know? It was our little corner of the world. Robert poured 2 glasses of water and pushed one towards her. Grace thanked him with a nod and drank slowly before continuing. "When I turned 16, I met John Peter Smith. He was from a neighboring farm, worked with his daddy in the fields. He was strong, hard-working, had a handsome smile." Grace's eyes shone with the memory. "We fell in love in that young way, you know. Intense, true. My daddy didn't want it at first, thought I was too young. But John proved he was a man of his word. He asked for my hand properly, spoke to my daddy, promised to take care of me. We got married when I was 18. It was a simple party at the town church, then a barn dance in my parents' yard. We moved into a little house. His daddy gave us just 2 rooms, but it was ours. And I was happy, Mr. Miller, so happy." She paused, her voice thickening. "A year later, Peter was born. 2 years after that, Johnny. My boys, my sons." Robert noticed she used the past tense and felt his stomach clench. "Peter got sick first. He was 7. It started with a fever, headache, vomiting. We thought it was a bad flu. I took him to the clinic in town, but there was no doctor that day. The nurse gave him some fever medicine and told us to come back if he didn't get better. But he got worse real fast, sir. In 2 days he was delirious with a stiff neck. We managed to get a ride to the bigger city, to the hospital. That's where they found it. Meningitis." Robert closed his eyes for a moment. "They tried to save him, they really did, but it was too late. Peter, he passed 3 days later. He was 7 years old." Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Me and John, we almost went crazy with grief. But we had Johnny, our 5-year-old baby. We had to. Be strong for him. We buried Peter in the town cemetery and went back home, but the nightmare wasn't over. "Dear God," Robert murmured. 3 weeks later, Johnny started with the same symptoms: fever, vomiting. This time we didn't wait. We took him straight to the hospital, but it was the same thing, meningitis. They tried everything, Mr. Miller. The doctors did everything they could. But it wasn't enough. My baby, my Johnny, he passed too. He was 5. The silence that fell over the kitchen was heavy, dense. Robert felt tears burning his eyes. 2 children. She had lost 2 children. After we buried Johnny next to his brother, I wanted to go with them. I wanted to lie down on the ground and never get up again. I stopped eating, talking, living. John wasn't much better. We were 2 walking dead in an empty house. We'd look at the corners where they used to play, and it was like the world had ended. "How did you survive that?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse. "Faith, Mr. Miller. Faith saved us." Grace looked at him with an intensity he didn't expect. "I'd always been a Catholic, but it was that sort of traditional faith, you know. Went to Mass because everyone went, prayed because my mama taught me. But after I lost my boys, I either had to find God for real or lose myself completely. And I chose to find Him. I started going to church every day. I'd pray the rosary, talk to God, fight with Him too. I'd ask why my boys, why both of them, what I had done so wrong to deserve that. And slowly, very slowly, I started to feel a peace. A peace that doesn't make sense, that isn't logical, but it exists. I started to believe that my boys were in a better place, without pain, without suffering, and that one day I would see them again. John clung to his faith too. We prayed together every day, morning and night, and that kept us alive, sir. That gave us the strength to go on. But we couldn't stay in that house anymore, in that town. Everything reminded us of them. Every corner, every tree, every stone on the path. Robert understood that feeling perfectly. So we made a decision. We were going to move to New York City. John had a cousin who lived here, worked in construction, said there was work. We sold what little we had, scraped together some money, and came. That was 5 years ago. I was 27. John was 29. New York was a shock, Mr. Miller. The city is so big, so fast, so different from anything we knew. At first we thought we'd made a mistake. We stayed with his cousin in a cramped room in a tenement in the South Bronx. John got a job on a construction site, getting paid by the day. I started working as a cleaner, cleaning rich folks' houses, doing laundry, ironing. Was it very different from Mississippi? Robert asked. It was another world, sir. Back home we were poor, but everyone was poor together. Here we saw the enormous wealth on one side and the poverty on the other. I cleaned houses that were the size of my parents' entire farm. I saw people throwing away food that could feed a family for a week. But I'm not complaining, sir. I'm very grateful for everything I got here. We worked hard, but we earned more than back home. We managed to rent our own a room, small but ours. Life was slowly getting better. Grace drank more water, her throat clearly dry from talking so much. Until 6 months ago, the accident happened. John was working on an office building in Midtown Manhattan. It was a big project, 30 stories. He was working on the 25th floor. One day he was setting up the external scaffolding, those platforms they use to work on the facade. But something went wrong. No one really knows what. A piece that wasn't secured properly, a cable that snapped. The scaffold collapsed. Robert felt his heart race. There were 3 men on the scaffold. 2 didn't survive the fall. John was lucky, if you can call it luck. He fell onto a tarp that was stretched out a few floors below. The tarp cushioned the fall. It saved his life, but it didn't save his spine. He was paralyzed, Robert said softly, from the waist down. The doctors said his spinal cord was severely damaged. They operated, did everything they could, but that was the result. A wheelchair. Forever. Grace took a deep breath. Again, I thought I was going to lose my mind. It wasn't enough to lose. My children, now my husband, my partner, was trapped in a chair, but John, he's strong, sir. Stronger than me. He said God had spared his life for a reason, and that we were going to get through this, too. Did the company pay for anything? They paid for the hospital treatment, the first few months of physical therapy. They gave a small settlement, but it wasn't enough. John needs physical therapy every day, expensive medication, equipment. We spent everything we had. I borrowed money from relatives, from friends, but it wasn't enough. I was working in 3 houses during the day, cleaning offices at night. I slept 4 hours a day, and it still wasn't enough. That's when a woman from my church called me. She knew a very wealthy man who needed a live-in nanny to take care of his twin daughters. The salary was very good. It came with room and board. She said you had been through a great loss and that the girls needed someone with patience and kindness. I accepted right away, Mr. Miller. Not for me, but for John. With this salary, I can pay for his physical therapy, his medication, everything he needs. Robert was stunned. This woman had lost 2 children, seen her husband paralyzed, and still found the strength to care for other children, to give love and patience. When I got here and saw the girls, I saw my sons. I saw Peter and Johnny. Laura reminds me so much of my Johnny, quiet, shy. Lucy is just like Peter, full of energy but keeping it all inside. And I saw you too. I saw a man destroyed by grief, exactly like me and John were. And I thought, if God sent me here, it's to help, to use my pain to ease the pain of others. That's why you prayed with them, Robert understood. Yes, sir, because faith saved me, and I believed it could save them too. But I shouldn't have done it without asking your permission. It was presumptuous of me. Robert stood up from the chair, walked to the window that overlooked the illuminated garden. He stood there, his back to Grace, processing everything he had heard. This woman had suffered more than most people suffer in a lifetime, and yet she was here caring for his daughters with a love and dedication that he couldn't give. He turned to her. How much do you make here, Grace? She told him the amount. It was a reasonable salary for a nanny, but nothing compared to what Robert paid for restaurant bills or a single Italian tie. Starting tomorrow, your salary is 3 times that. Grace's eyes widened. Sir, you don't have to. Yes, I do. And more. I'm going to find the best neurosurgeons in the country, the best spinal specialists. I'll pay for all of John's treatments, all the therapies, all the equipment he needs. If there's any chance at all of improvement, we'll find it. Mr. Miller, I can't accept this. It's too much charity. It's not charity, it's gratitude. You gave me my daughters back. You showed me that there's still goodness, that there's still true love in the world. Let me do this, please. Grace began to cry, covering her face with her hands. Robert approached, and for the first time in 2 years, touched another human being with real empathy. He placed a hand on her shoulder. And there's one more thing. Where is your mother? Still in Mississippi, sir. She lives with my younger sister. I want to bring her here, to live with us. The girls would love to have a grandmother around, and you deserve to have your mother close to you. This house is too big, too empty. Let's fill it with life again. That night, Robert went up to his room feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope, and a strange feeling that Marianne from somewhere had sent Grace to them, to save them, to teach them how to live again. The next 3 months transformed the Upper East Side mansion from a silent mausoleum into a home full of life. The change began subtly, almost imperceptibly, but it gained momentum like a plant that finally finds sunlight after a long winter. Robert started coming home at 7 in the evening instead of 11, then 6:30, then 6. His assistant, Patricia, nearly had a nervous breakdown with the changes to his schedule, but he was adamant. He delegated more responsibilities to his directors, refused evening commitments, said no to business dinners he once considered essential. For the first time in 2 years, the company was not his only priority. Laura and Lucy were the first to notice. At first, they found it strange to see him arrive early, as if they didn't know how to react to the presence of this man, who was their father but seemed like a stranger. But Grace, with her simple and profound wisdom, built bridges. "Girls, look who's here. It's Daddy. Let's tell him what we did today," she would say with genuine enthusiasm, taking them both by the hand and leading them to Robert. In the beginning, the girls would just nod shyly, but gradually they began to talk about the drawings they made, the story Grace had read, the bird they saw, in the garden. And Robert, a man accustomed to negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, to making decisions that affected hundreds of employees, discovered he didn't know how to talk to his own daughters. It was Grace who taught him. "You need to get down on their level, Mr. Miller," she would say gently. "Kneel on the floor, look into their little eyes, ask about their drawings, their dolls, what they like. Children need to feel that we're genuinely interested." So Robert learned. He learned to sit on the floor of the playroom even in his expensive suit. He learned to make funny voices when reading stories. He learned that Laura loved it when he pretended to be a dragon and that Lucy giggled when he tickled her. Small details that a father should know, but that he had missed when he drowned himself in work and grief. Meals became sacred. Every night at 7:30, the four of them would sit at the kitchen table, not at the immense formal dining table. Grace cooked simple Southern comfort food that the girls adored: fried chicken, grits, cornbread, shrimp and grits, biscuits, dishes that Marianne had never made, that didn't remind him of her, and were therefore easier to savor. "Tell us a story about your home, Auntie Grace," Lucy would ask, using the affectionate title they had given the nanny. And Grace would tell stories, stories of the farm, of county fairs, of her childhood in the country, stories that made the girls laugh and imagine a world completely different from the luxury they lived in. Robert realized this was healthy. His daughters were learning that there was more to the world than mansions and imported cars. Meanwhile, Robert fulfilled every promise he had made that night in the kitchen. He used all his contacts, all his influence, to find the best specialists in spinal cord injuries. He got an appointment with Dr. Henry Travers, a renowned neurosurgeon who usually had a months-long waiting list. He paid for John to be taken by private ambulance to the doctor's office at Mount Sinai Hospital. Grace went along, of course. Robert insisted she take the day off, but he hired a temporary babysitter to stay with the twins. When she returned that night, Robert was waiting anxiously. "So, what did the doctor say?" Grace's eyes were shining with hope, mixed with tears. "He said there's a chance, Mr. Miller. A small chance, but a chance. There's an experimental surgery, a new technique they're testing. It doesn't guarantee John will walk again, but it could bring some improvement. It could make him feel his legs again, have some movement. Then we'll do it." "When?" "The doctor said he needs tests first, MRIs, a full evaluation. It's going to cost a lot of money, sir. He gave me an estimate and—" "I don't care about the price. Schedule everything. We'll do it." The surgery took place 6 weeks later. It lasted 9 hours. Robert cleared his schedule for the day and stayed at the hospital with Grace, who prayed the rosary non-stop in the chapel. When Dr. Travers finally came out of the operating room, tired but smiling discreetly, Grace almost fainted. "The surgery was a success. We were able to complete the full procedure. Now we wait. In the coming weeks, we'll know the results." John woke up from the anesthesia with Grace by his side, holding his hand. Robert watched them from a distance. This thin man in the hospital bed, his eyes full of gratitude as he looked at his wife. And he understood what true love was. Not the romantic love of soap operas and movies, but the love that remains when everything falls apart, the love that holds your hand in sickness, that doesn't abandon you in hardship. 3 months of intensive physical therapy followed. Robert arranged for John to be transferred to a top-tier rehabilitation clinic with the best physical therapists in the country. He paid for everything without blinking. Grace visited him 3 times a week on her days off. The girls sent drawings that she brought, small works of childish art that John hung on his room wall. And then, on a rainy Wednesday in June, the miracle happened. Grace came home transfigured, laughing and crying at the same time. "He moved his big toe. Mr. Miller, John moved his big toe. The therapist saw it, I saw it. He asked John to try, and he did it. Just a little bit, but it moved." In the following months, the improvement was slow but steady. John began to feel tingling in his legs. Then he managed to contract his thigh muscles. Then, with great effort and sweat, he managed to stand supported by the parallel bars for a few seconds. Each small victory was celebrated as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. Meanwhile, another important change occurred. Teresa, Grace's mother, arrived from Mississippi. She was a short, round woman in her 60s with the same lilting accent as her daughter and a constant smile on her sun-weathered face. She filled the house with Southern joy. "Oh, my beautiful granddaughters," she would say, opening her arms to Laura and Lucy, who ran to hug her. Because in just a few weeks they were already calling her Grandma, as if she had always been part of the family. Teresa took over the kitchen with gentle authority. She made biscuits, pecan pie, peach cobbler. She taught the girls how to make cookies and brownies, letting the immaculate kitchen become a zone of flour and chocolate. She sang Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton songs while she cooked. She told folk tales from the South, as if they were fairy tales. Robert would come home from work to find the house filled with the smell of home cooking, with laughter, with music. It was so different from the sepulchral silence of before that sometimes he would just stop in the entrance hall, to absorb it, to believe it was real. One evening he found Laura and Lucy in their room, kneeling beside the bed, praying with Teresa and Grace. "Thank you, God, for Grandma T. Thank you for Auntie Grace. Thank you for Daddy, who plays with us now. Thank you for Uncle John, who's getting better. And thank you for Mommy, who watches over us from heaven. Amen." Robert stood frozen in the doorway, his heart tight. Marianne. They spoke of Marianne naturally now, without paralyzing pain, without the terrible silence. They spoke of her with longing, yes, but also with gratitude for the life she had given them. Grace had done that. She had taught the girls to honor their mother's memory without being destroyed by it. That night, after everyone was asleep, Robert went out into the garden. It was a clear night, the stars visible despite New York's light pollution. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time in 2 years, he talked to Marianne. "You sent her to us, didn't you, Grace? You knew I was lost, that the girls were lost. And you sent someone who could save us, someone who knew pain, like we did. Thank you, my love. Thank you for still taking care of us, even from far away." A gentle breeze rustled the trees in the garden, and Robert felt a peace he hadn't felt since the accident, as if Marianne were there, approving, smiling, happy to see her daughters smiling again. He didn't know it yet on that quiet night that the greatest test was yet to come, that his heart, which he had judged dead and buried along with Marianne, was about to awaken again, and that this awakening would bring complications he could never have imagined. But for now, in that moment of peace under the stars, Robert allowed himself to just be grateful. Grateful for life, for a second chance, for the presence of this simple woman from rural Mississippi who had brought light back into his dark home. The change in Robert was so gradual that he himself didn't notice when it began. Perhaps it was the morning he came down for coffee, and Grace was humming in the kitchen, her hair down for the first time, the morning sunlight illuminating her simple face in a way that made him stop and stare. Perhaps it was the afternoon he came home and found her in the garden with the girls, the three of them laughing as they tried to catch butterflies, and his heart gave a strange leap in his chest. Or perhaps it had been accumulating, day after day, every time she smiled, every time her soft voice calmed the twins, every time he saw her pray with that unshakable faith. 6 months had passed since that first afternoon he had seen her praying with his daughters. 6 months of transformation, of healing, of rediscovery. John was progressing wonderfully in physical therapy, already, able to take a few steps with a walker. Laura and Lucy were completely different children, smiling, talkative, full of life. The house had become a home. And Robert, without realizing how or when, had fallen in love with Grace. The realization hit him one September night when he found her alone in the garden after everyone else had gone to bed. She was kneeling on the grass, her hands clasped, praying softly. The full moon illuminated her profile, and Robert stood there, watching, feeling something immense and terrifying grow in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude, though there was a great deal of that. It wasn't just admiration, though he admired her deeply. It was something deeper, more visceral. It was the desire to protect her, to see her smile, to spend the rest of his life by her side. It was love. Real, true, impossible. Impossible because she was married. Impossible because she was his employee. Impossible because they came from completely different worlds. Impossible because he had no right to feel this. But he did. Robert went back inside the house, his heart pounding, and went straight up to his room. He spent the night awake, fighting, with himself. For the first time in 2 years he thought of Marianne, not with paralyzing pain, but with a gentle longing. And he wondered if she would be angry with him for moving on, if she would approve, if it was a betrayal to love again. "You wanted me to be happy," he whispered to the photo of Marianne on his nightstand. "You always said that if anything happened to you I should move on, be happy. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I have the right." The photo smiled back, silent. In the following weeks, Robert tried to hide what he felt. He remained professional, distant. But it was difficult when Grace was always there, caring for the girls with so much love, filling the house with light. It was difficult when she smiled at him at breakfast and his whole day became better. It was difficult when she told stories of Mississippi, and he caught himself imagining visiting that land, understanding better where she came from. Teresa was the first to notice. Mothers always notice these things. One afternoon she called Robert for coffee in the kitchen. It was rare for them to talk alone, and Robert felt a little apprehensive. "Mr. Robert," she began with her direct Southern way, "I'm going to say something because I like you and I respect you. You're looking at my daughter differently." Robert felt his blood run cold. "Teresa, let me finish." She held up a hand. "I'm not saying what you're feeling is wrong. We don't control our feelings. But my daughter is a married woman, Mr. Robert. She loves John. She's faithful to her vows. And she's afraid of losing this job, this house, everything you've given her and her husband. So I'm asking you, be careful. Don't put my daughter in a difficult situation." "I would never do anything to disrespect Grace or her marriage," Robert said sincerely. I've grown to admire her very much, for what she's done for my daughters, for who she is." Teresa studied him with those wise eyes that had seen so much in life. "You're a good man, Mr. Robert. I see that. But the heart is a treacherous thing. It doesn't care about what's right or wrong. It only cares about what it wants, and I'm seeing that your heart wants my daughter." Robert didn't deny it. There was no point. "I'll pray for you both," Teresa said, getting up. "For God to show you the right path. But for now, Mr. Robert, the right path is for you to keep those feelings to yourself. My daughter can't return them. She won't return them. She's a one-man woman." That conversation should have been enough for Robert to back off. But the heart, as Teresa had said, was treacherous. 2 months later, on a cold November night, Robert couldn't hold it in any longer. He had spent the entire day in a tense meeting with investors, resolving a crisis at the company. He came home exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. The girls were already asleep. Teresa had gone to visit John at the clinic, and Grace was in the garden, as always, praying. This time Robert didn't just watch. He approached and Grace heard him, opening her eyes and turning around. "Mr. Miller, I didn't hear you come in. Have you had dinner? I saved a plate for you in the—" "Grace," he interrupted, and there was something in his voice that made her fall silent. "I need to talk to you." She stood up, brushing the grass from her hands, clearly worried. "Did something happen? Are the girls okay? Did I do something wrong?" "No. You've done nothing wrong. You've done everything right. That's the problem." Robert ran a hand through his hair, trying to find the words. "You saved my daughters, Grace. You saved me. You brought life back to this house. You've become essential to us. To me. Mr. Miller, let me finish. Please." He took a deep breath. "I know this is wrong. I know I have no right. I know you're married, that you love your husband, that I'm your employer, and this would be an abuse of power. I know all of that. But I have to tell you, because if I don't, I'm going to explode. Grace, I'm falling in love with you." "No, I've already fallen. Completely." The silence that fell over the garden was as heavy as lead. Grace stared at him with wide eyes, her mouth half open in shock. "I'm not expecting anything from you," Robert continued quickly. "I'm not going to pressure you. I'm not going to do anything inappropriate. You won't lose your job, your salary, nothing. I promised for John. I just needed to tell you because it's killing me to keep this inside. You taught me how to live again, Grace. You taught me that the heart can heal. You showed me what's truly important in life. How could I not fall in love with you?" Tears began to roll down Grace's face. "Mr. Miller, you can't say these things. You can't. I know I can't, but I did. I'm a married woman." Her voice came out in a desperate whisper. "I made vows before God. I love my husband. John, he's suffered so much, been through so much. How can you ask me to? I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you the truth." "But you don't understand." Grace was crying openly now. "I'm the nanny, Mr. Miller, an immigrant with no education, who cleans houses, who came from the country. You're a rich, powerful, educated man. We're from different worlds. And even if we weren't, I'm married. I won't betray my vows. It doesn't matter what I feel." She stopped abruptly, covering her mouth with her hand. "What you feel?" Robert asked softly, his heart racing. "It doesn't matter." "What I feel," she corrected, avoiding his eyes, "because I made a promise before God, in sickness and in health. I'm not going to break that promise, Mr. Miller, no matter how hard it is." "So you do feel something?" It wasn't a question. Grace turned her face away, tears shining in the moonlight. "It doesn't change anything. I'll continue to do my job, care for the girls, be grateful for everything you've done for me and for John. But this conversation can't happen again. Please, Mr. Miller, for everyone's sake, don't make this harder than it already is." She practically ran back into the house, leaving Robert alone in the garden. He sank onto the stone bench, his head in his hands. It had been a mistake to speak, a terrible mistake, but at the same time, there was her small confession. "It doesn't matter what I feel." She felt something, she felt it. But she was right. She was married. And Robert would never, ever ask her to betray her vows. Not like this. Not in this way. In the following days, the tension in the house was palpable. Grace avoided being alone with Robert. Teresa looked at them both with concern. The girls, sensitive as children are, noticed something was different but didn't understand what. And then, 3 weeks after that conversation in the garden, the phone rang. It was from the rehabilitation clinic where John was staying, and the news they gave would change everything in a way no one could have predicted. John had suffered a severe emotional breakdown. He was refusing physical therapy, refusing to eat, talking about giving up on everything. And he was demanding to see Grace immediately. It was urgent. Robert insisted on driving Grace to the rehabilitation clinic. She tried to refuse, saying she would take a taxi, but he was adamant. Teresa stayed with the girls while they left in the black Mercedes, the heavy silence between them in the back seat. The clinic was on the west side of the city, a modern building surrounded by well-kept gardens. Dr. Campos, John's lead physical therapist, was waiting for them in the reception area with a grave expression. "Mrs. Smith, I'm glad you came quickly. John is going through a crisis. It started 3 days ago. He's refusing to do his exercises. He's barely eating. He says he wants to go back to Mississippi, that he can't stand being here anymore." "But he was doing so well," Grace said, her voice trembling. "Last week he managed to take 6 steps without help. What happened?" The doctor exchanged a look with Robert. "Sometimes, when patients start to improve, they're confronted with the reality of how far they still have to go. Literally, in John's case, it's as if he had hope for the first time in months, and it scared him. The fear of disappointing, of not succeeding, of being a burden." "He's never been a burden," Grace whispered. "I know, but he doesn't see it that way, and there's something else." The doctor hesitated. "He's been talking a lot about you, about how hard you work, how tired you always are when you come to visit. He feels guilty." "Can I see him?" "Of course. He's in his room, but Mrs. Smith, I need to warn you, he's quite emotionally distressed." Robert stayed in the waiting room while Grace went in. He looked out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind, trying not to imagine what was happening in that room. Half an hour later, Grace came out. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "He wants to talk to you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Robert was surprised. "With me? Are you sure?" He asked. "Please go." The room was simple but comfortable, with a hospital bed, a few chairs, and a large window overlooking the garden. John was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking out. He was a thin man, with broad shoulders that must have once been muscular, but were now thinner from the time without heavy labor. His face was weathered by the sun, his skin tanned, his black hair cut short. When he turned to Robert, his brown eyes were full of pain. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming." His voice was soft, but there was a firmness to it. "John, how are you? I'm going to be honest with you because you deserve honesty. You've done so much for me and for Grace. Paid for the surgery, the treatment. You're paying for this expensive clinic. I'll never be able to repay you for this. Never in my life. You don't need to repay anything. I did it because I wanted to, because my wife saved your daughters. I know." John took a deep breath. "But I can't do this anymore, Mr. Miller. I can't stand being here, in this city, in this situation. I want to go back to Mississippi. I want to go back to my home, where I know people, where things are simpler. But your treatment, I know I still need treatment. I know that New York has the best doctors, the best clinics. But I'm becoming a burden to Grace. She works 18 hours a day, takes care of your daughters, comes to visit me, barely sleeps. And why? Because of me. Because I fell from that scaffold and became a cripple." "You are not a cripple, you are recovering." "I am," John agreed. "But I'll always be dependent. I'll always need help, care, and I've seen the way you look at my wife, Mr. Miller." The silence that fell was absolute. Robert felt his heart pound. "I'm not stupid," John continued, without anger, just with a profound sadness. "Grace doesn't tell me everything, but I know. I see it in her eyes when she talks about your daughters, about your home. I see that she's found a purpose there that she doesn't have with me. And I see that you, a rich and powerful man, are in love with my wife. John, I would never... I know you've never done anything wrong, and I know Grace never would. She's a one-man woman, faithful as they come. But that doesn't change the fact that maybe she would be happier with you. You can give her a life I can never give her. Security, comfort, a family. She always wanted more children after we lost ours. I can't give her that." "That's not true. The doctors said that..." "The doctors say a lot of things, Mr. Miller. But the truth is I'm stuck in this chair, depending on the kindness of others, being a burden, and I don't want that anymore. So I'm going to give Grace an ultimatum. Either she comes back with me to Mississippi when I'm able to travel, and we build a simple life there within my limitations, or we end our marriage here and now, and each of us goes our own way." "You can't do that to her," Robert said, feeling anger for the first time. "You can't force her to choose." "I'm not forcing anything. I'm giving her the freedom to choose the life she wants. If she wants to stay with me, I'll love her until my last day. But if she wants to move on, find someone who can give her everything I can't, I won't stop her. Because loving someone truly means wanting their happiness even if it's away from you." Robert looked at the man in the wheelchair and felt a mixture of admiration and guilt. John was being noble in a way he wasn't sure he could be. "And you, Mr. Miller," John continued, "you need to decide too. If you really love my wife, you need to be ready to accept everything that means. She's not like the women you know. She won't fit into your world of luxury and business. She's simple, direct, has faith in God above all else. Are you ready to accept that? Or is this just an infatuation that will pass?" "It's not an infatuation. It's love, true love." "Then prove it. Let her make the right choice. Without pressure, without guilt. If she chooses to come back with me, you respect it. If she chooses to stay and eventually move on without me, you wait as long as it takes, because she'll need time to honor her vows, to grieve if it comes to that." That night, back at the mansion, Grace told Robert about the ultimatum. They were in the kitchen, the same place where she had told him her story months ago. "He gave me a month to decide," she said, her hands trembling as she held her teacup. "A month to choose between my marriage and this life here. And what do you want, Grace? Deep in your heart, what do you want?" "I don't know," she cried. "I love John. He's my husband, the father of my children who are gone. We've been through so much together. How can I abandon him now, when he needs me most? But are you happy with him in this situation? Happiness isn't everything, Mr. Miller. There's commitment, there's loyalty, there are the vows I made. For better or for worse, remember? Well, this is the worse. How can I leave just because it got hard? Robert moved closer to her, taking her hands. Grace, I'm going to tell you something, and you need to believe me. If you decide to go back to Mississippi with John, I will respect it. I will continue to pay for all his treatments. I will ensure you have a good house there, everything you need. The girls will miss you. I will miss you. But I will let you go. Because I love you enough to want your happiness, even if it's not with me. Grace sobbed, resting her head on his shoulder for the first time, and Robert held her, feeling his heart break and heal at the same time. 2 weeks of agony passed. Grace was visibly tortured, praying more than usual, losing weight, with deep, dark circles under her eyes. Teresa tried to advise her, but even she was torn. Laura and Lucy sensed something was wrong and clung to Grace constantly, as if they felt she might disappear. And then, on a rainy Thursday, the clinic's phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Campos, and his voice was urgent. Mr. Miller, I need you and Mrs. Smith to come immediately. John has suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. He's being transferred to Mount Sinai Hospital now. It's serious. Robert and Grace arrived at the hospital in time to see John being rushed to the neurological ICU. The doctors explained it had been a brain aneurysm, likely a delayed complication from the original fall. He was in a coma. The next 48 hours would be crucial. Robert used all his contacts, brought in the best neurosurgeons in the country. He authorized an emergency surgery that lasted 11 hours, and through it all, Grace never left the waiting room, praying the rosary non-stop, with Teresa by her side. The surgery was technically successful. They managed to stop the bleeding, but John didn't wake up. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks. 3 weeks. Robert practically lived at the hospital, cancelled everything at the company, focused only on being there for Grace. In the 4th week, the doctors called Grace for a conversation. Robert went with her, holding her hand. Mrs. Smith, Dr. Travers said with brutal kindness, we need to talk about the reality of the situation. The tests show that John's brain activity is minimal. He is in a persistent vegetative state. The chances of him waking up are virtually non-existent, and even if he did, the damage to his brain is extensive. He would no longer be the person you knew. But he's breathing, Grace whispered. His heart is beating. Because the machines are doing that for him, Mrs. Smith, eventually, you will need to make a decision about whether or not to continue life support. Not now, not yet, but at some point, and it's a decision only you can make. Grace broke down. Robert held her as she cried convulsively, a cry that came from a place so deep it seemed to have no end, and he understood that, no matter how much he loved her, this pain was not his to carry. It was hers, and hers. All he could do was be there. That night in the hospital chapel, Grace prayed as she had never prayed before, and she asked God to show her the way, to give her the strength to do what was right, even if it was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. The decision came in the early hours of the morning, after a whole night of prayer. Grace was alone in the hospital chapel, kneeling on the hard pew, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. The faint light of the candles flickering on the walls created dancing shadows, and it was there in that sacred silence that she felt peace, a peace that made no logical sense, but that filled her heart with an unshakable certainty. John was not coming back. He had already left. Only his body remained, tethered to machines, and keeping him like this was not love, it was her fear of letting go. But he deserved peace. He deserved to rest. He deserved to join their sons, Peter and Johnny, who were surely waiting for him. The next morning, with Teresa and Robert by her side, Grace communicated her decision to the doctors. A priest was present who administered the last rites to John. Teresa prayed softly. Robert just held Grace's hand, giving her the silent strength she needed. I know you can hear me from somewhere, my love, Grace whispered, leaning over the bed where John lay motionless. And I know you're tired, so tired of fighting. So I'm giving you permission to go, John. Go in peace. Go find our boys. Take care of them until I get there. And one day, when God wills it, we'll see each other again." She kissed his forehead, feeling the cold skin. And then she nodded to the doctors. They turned off the machines slowly, respectfully. The beep of the heart monitor slowed, until it became a flat line and a continuous tone. John Peter Smith was gone. Robert took care of everything, as he had promised. He arranged for the body to be transported to Mississippi, paid for a dignified funeral, and ensured John was buried next to his 2 sons in the cemetery of the town where they were born. Grace wanted to go alone with Teresa, and Robert respected that. She needed time to say goodbye, to honor her husband's memory away from everything that represented her future. She stayed in Mississippi for 3 weeks. Robert sent daily messages, just asking if she was okay, never pressuring. The twins made drawings that he photographed and sent. "Grandma T, we miss you," they wrote in crooked letters. When Grace finally returned to New York, she was different, lighter somehow, as if she had left a weight behind in Mississippi. Teresa hugged her tightly at the airport. Laura and Lucy ran into her arms, crying with joy, and Robert just watched from a distance, giving her space. That night, after the girls were asleep, Grace found him in his office. "I need to tell you something," she said, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "In the last few weeks before the aneurysm, when John gave me that ultimatum, he told me something. He said that if anything happened to him, if he passed, he wanted me to be happy. He said you were a good man and that I deserved someone who truly loved me." Robert felt his throat tighten. "He gave me permission, Robert. Before any of this happened, he had already given me permission, as if he knew, as if he sensed it." Tears streamed down her face. "He wanted me to live, not to bury myself with him." "Grace, let me finish. I spent these 3 weeks in Mississippi, praying, thinking, talking with God. And I understood that life is a gift, Robert, a short and precious gift. I lost my 2 sons, I lost my husband. I've been through so much pain. But God brought me to you, to this house, to these girls. And I don't think it was an accident. I think it was purpose. I think so too. But I need time. I need to respect John's memory, to grieve properly. I can't just move from one life to another as if nothing happened. Do you understand?" "I understand, and I will wait, for as long as you need." "You promise?" "I promise. A year, 2, 5. It doesn't matter. You're worth the wait, Grace. You always were." And so time passed. A slow, respectful year. Grace continued to care for the twins, who continued to grow, to learn, to blossom. Robert continued to transform his life, dedicating more time to his family, less to business. He created social programs at Tech Vision America to help immigrants like Grace, offering jobs, training, opportunities. He and Grace were friends. They talked about everything, shared meals with the girls and Teresa, laughed together. But they maintained a respectful distance, an invisible boundary that they both honored. And then, one spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after John's passing, Grace sought Robert out in the garden where it had all begun. "Robert," she said, using his first name without Mr. for the first time. "I've been thinking a lot, praying a lot, and I think I've reached a place of peace. I've honored John's memory, I've grieved. I've remembered everything we lived through together, the good and the bad, and I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "To try. To see if what we feel can become something real, something lasting. If you still want to, of course." Robert felt his heart explode with joy. "If I still want to? Grace, I've loved you since that first afternoon I saw you praying with the girls. I haven't stopped loving you for a single day. Then we need to do things right. Slowly, respectfully. I want to date you, to get to know you beyond the boss, beyond the father of the girls I care for. I want to understand who you really are." And that's what they did. A slow, old-fashioned courtship, like in Teresa's time. Robert took Grace to dinner at simple restaurants she chose, not the expensive, sophisticated places he frequented. They went to the movies, walked in Central Park, watched the sunset from an observation deck. They talked for hours about everything, about nothing. The twins watched with growing curiosity. "Daddy likes Auntie Grace," Lucy said one day to her sister. "He smiles differently when she's around." "And Auntie Grace likes him too," Laura agreed, with wisdom beyond her 5 years. "Do you think they'll get married?" Teresa would laugh. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, my granddaughters. We just need to have faith and patience." Another 6 months passed. Robert took Grace to Mississippi to see her roots, to visit the graves of John and their boys. He placed flowers on all 3 graves and silently thanked John for having loved Grace so well, for having been such a noble man. Grace took Robert to meet her family, her siblings, the farms where she had grown up. He, the millionaire CEO accustomed to 5-star hotels, slept in a hammock in a simple clapboard house, ate farm-raised chicken, and talked with people who barely knew who he was and didn't care about his fortune. "This is where you were born," he said, looking at the arid and beautiful landscape of the countryside. "This is where you came from, and it's beautiful, Grace. Everything in this land is honest and true, just like you." 2 years after John's passing, on a summer night in New York, Robert prepared a surprise. He filled the garden with candles, put soft music on. When Grace came out to see what was happening, she found a path of rose petals leading to the center of the garden where Robert was waiting for her. Laura and Lucy were there too, in white dresses, holding a hand-painted banner that read, "Marry us, Auntie Grace." Teresa was crying with emotion in a corner. Robert knelt, not in his usual expensive suit, but in a simple linen shirt Grace had bought for him at a market in Mississippi. In his hand, a box with a simple ring, no huge diamonds or ostentation, just a white gold band with an inscription, 2 hearts healed by love. "Grace, you taught me that wealth isn't measured in money but in love. You gave me back my daughters. You taught me how to be a father again. You showed me that the heart can heal, even after the worst losses. I love you with everything I am, with everything I have. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Will you marry me?" Grace was crying, laughing, trembling. "Yes! 1,000 times yes!" The girls screamed with joy, running to hug them. Teresa prayed a Hail Mary of gratitude, and Robert kissed Grace for the first time, a soft, respectful kiss that sealed a promise of true love. The wedding took place 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday. It was at the neighborhood church on the Upper East Side, not in a pompous cathedral. The decorations were simple, with flowers from the south that Teresa had specially ordered. The guests were an interesting mix: executives in suits next to Southern immigrants in their Sunday best, colleagues from TechVision sharing pews with the former employers for whom Grace had worked as a cleaner. Grace walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, in a simple but elegant dress with no extravagant veil, just a small arrangement of flowers in her hair. When she reached the altar and saw Robert waiting, with Laura and Lucy as flower girls by his side, she knew she had come home. The priest who married them was the same one who had given John the last rites. He spoke of loss and new beginnings, of God's grace that transforms pain into joy. "Robert and Grace have come to this altar through paths of suffering," he said. "Both have known the deepest loss a person can know, but they chose not to let that pain destroy them. They chose faith, they chose love, they chose life, and today before God and all of us, they choose each other." When they exchanged rings, when they said "I do," when they kissed as husband and wife, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. It was the most beautiful story many there had ever witnessed. The reception was in the mansion's garden, with Southern and New York music mingling, barbecue and biscuits served side by side, country music and classical music alternating. It was the perfect fusion of 2 worlds that had learned to respect and love each other. The following years brought more joy. Grace became pregnant at 36. To everyone's surprise and ecstasy, she had a boy, strong and healthy, who was named John Peter in honor of her first husband. 2 years later, a girl was born named Marianne, in honor of Robert's first wife. The 4 children grew up together. Laura and Lucy, already 9 years old when their siblings were born, were crazy about the babies. There was no jealousy or resentment, only pure love. They called Grace Mom now, naturally, and she was a mother in every sense that mattered. Robert drastically reduced his role at TechVision. He passed the presidency to a trusted director and remained only on the board, attending meetings once a month. The rest of his time he dedicated to his family. He took the children to school, attended their parties, went to parent-teacher meetings. He was the present father the twins had always deserved, and that the little ones had from the beginning. Grace started a foundation called A Dignified New Start, focused on helping immigrant families arriving in New York. It offered temporary housing, job training, and psychological support. She used her own story to give hope to others who had lost everything and were trying to rebuild their lives. Teresa, now in her 70s, was the perfect grandmother to the 4 children. She still commanded the kitchen with a firm hand, teaching Southern recipes to Laura and Lucy, singing lullabies to John Peter and Marianne. She was the heart of the home, the foundation upon which everything rested. One Sunday afternoon, 7 years after the wedding, Robert and Grace were sitting in the garden watching the children play. John Peter, 5, was chasing Laura and Lucy, who were pretending to be monsters. Marianne, 3, was trying to keep up, but her short legs didn't help much. Teresa supervised from a distance, laughing at their antics. "Can you believe we made it here?" Grace asked, her head on Robert's shoulder. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream," he admitted. "Do you remember how it all started? Me coming home that afternoon, finding you praying with the girls?" "How could I forget? It was the day you saw your daughters again. The day you started to live again. You saved me, Grace. You saved all of us." "No," she corrected gently. "God saved us. He brought 2 broken families together and made a new whole one. He turned our pain into love." Robert pulled her closer. "Do you know what I've learned all these years? That wealth has nothing to do with money. I was a billionaire when I met you, but I was the poorest man in the world. Now watching our 4 children play, having you by my side, having Teresa filling this house with life, I am the richest man alive." "And I," Grace said, her eyes shining with happy tears, "I who lost 2 sons and a husband, who thought I would never be happy again, I found a family bigger than I ever dreamed of. I found love twice, because John loved me with everything he had, and you love me the same way, and I am blessed to have known you both." He was a good man. He was, and he would be happy to see us like this. I know he's looking down from up there, beside Marianne, beside our boys, and he's smiling. He's happy because we chose to live, chose to love again. That night, after the children were put to bed, after the prayers were said and the stories told, after everyone was asleep, Robert stayed awake a little longer. He went to the bedroom window and looked at the stars. "Marianne," he whispered to the night, "if you're listening, thank you. Thank you for giving me the girls, for teaching me what it is to love, and thank you for sending Grace to us. I will never forget you. I will never stop loving you. But I've learned that the heart is big enough to love twice, in different but equally true ways. I hope you are at, I hope you, peace. I hope you are happy for us." A shooting star streaked across the sky at that moment, and Robert smiled. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe not. But he chose to believe it was Marianne, sending her love and her approval. In bed, Grace was waiting for him, and he lay down beside her, holding her, and they fell asleep together, 2 hearts healed by love, 2 souls who found light after the deepest darkness. A family built on losses turned into lessons, pain turned into compassion, and an unshakable faith that even in the most desperate situations God does not abandon his children. And so in the Upper East Side mansion that had been a tomb and had become a home, life went on, full of laughter, of prayers, of hugs, of love. True wealth, after all, was never measured in money. It was measured in each child's smile, in each shared meal, in each night slept in peace. It was measured in the ability to rise after the fall, to love after loss, to live after death. And that was the greatest fortune of all.